Christina and I are going to talk about well water today.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say quite a few of Hydroviv's customers are individuals that live on a private well or get their water from a private well. And so we just wanted to make sure that those customers are entirely informed and kind of have an understanding of why well water is so different than municipal tap water. So today we're going to talk about the contaminants that are typically found in well water that might not usually be found in municipal tap water. We'll talk a little bit about testing, and we'll talk about how private wells are regulated or not regulated kind of at the very end. So yeah, I mean, just to kind of kick things off, well water is unique because a lot of the contaminants come from natural or naturally occurring sources. So probably the two most common would be arsenic and uranium. And so we'll dive into arsenic at the end, just because it is the most well known, and I want to give the other contaminants an opportunity to shine at the beginning. So I guess we'll start with uranium. And I know that when people hear this, they think, you know, toxic waste, like that like yellow toxic symbol flashes in their head. But that's not necessarily the case. So I'll let Christina get into uranium and just kind of give us the lowdown, everything that private well owners need to understand about uranium. So Christina, take it away.
Okay. So uranium is actually naturally occurring. It comes from the ground. It's a radionuclide, and the current EPA safe max level, the regulatory level beyond which is considered a violation, is 30 parts per billion or 30 picocuries per liter. We actually had a customer on a private well in Maine who had 235 parts per billion uranium in their well, which is over 7 times the safe level. Fortunately, our filters were able to bring it down to undetectable, but it was one of the highest levels we've ever seen. But once again, we're not talking about, toxic waste. It actually is just naturally occurring. It's in the ground, and so it ends up in the water. But you still don't want to be consuming it.
Right. And so then next we'll just kind of go through the list here. I wanted to bring up PFAS, which if you're on municipal tap water, you may have heard of this contaminant. Those on private wells, maybe not. And that just really has to do with the fact that private well owners don't even need to, or they don't even understand that they need to be testing for this. And the reality is that testing for PFAS is incredibly expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, people on municipal tap water, their utility, I might have just went away for a second. Their utility can actually, test for PFAS. And some are, but a lot aren't. And so, people on private wells, they're responsible for testing for all of the contaminants that we're talking about today. And PFAS is one of those emerging contaminants that is really expensive to test for. It's not as simple as that like arsenic test that costs, $20 or however much. So, we talk about PFAS all the time on this channel. So for a more in-depth video, definitely check out our previous Instagram lives. But just for the quick lowdown on PFAS, emerging contaminant, they are everywhere. They're in the drinking water of over 200 million Americans. So we know that they are known to cause cancers and negatively impact reproductive outcomes and a whole host of other negative health impacts. So we know that they're really bad. We know that they're in our drinking water. Um, However, those on private wells might not know, because it's just not one of those things that when you buy a house, or when you're looking to test your well water, it's not like one of the things that just comes with a standard test. So definitely wanted to flag PFAS, as we're kind of going through this list.
And I also wanted to add, a lot of times people will say, oh, but my well's really deep, so my water's safe, right? It's not going to get these other contaminants because it's dug so deep. But unfortunately, with contaminants like PFAS, it gets in just about everywhere. And, the things that make it useful, like Teflon, and it just, it doesn't stick to anything, means that it slides through and it can just get into the water, even if it's really deep, even if it's in the aquifer, even if it's, just your own standalone well and you're far away from any civilization. You wouldn't believe where people have found PFAS in the most remote parts.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think like a lot, or some people on private wells live, they're super remote in the middle of nowhere. And I think they might think, I don't need to be worried about anything in my water. Like there's just
it's so pure. It comes right from the mountains. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I remember when Christine and I were just kind of doing some research on PFAS, and where did you find PFAS? Like some remote island? Like it's everywhere.
The Faroe Islands. I actually literally had to Google where that was, because it's so remote, out in the middle of the ocean, literally surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean on every side. And they found PFAS there too. So PFAS travels.
Yes.
And gets in everywhere. It doesn't stick to anything.
So we can move on to biologicals. And so these are something that well owners probably know a thing or two about. But Christina, I would love for you to just kind of, again, give us the lowdown. How do we remove these biological contaminants, and what are they? And
Sure. I can channel my inner microbiologist with this one. It's typically E. coli or Escherichia coli, but it's a whole family of coliform bacteria that are tested for. A lot of times they're found in feces and things like that that can contaminate the water. So the health, the local health offices, a lot of times, if they're going to do any testing of private wells, that's the first thing they'll test for, because they want to see, if you're drinking this water, is it going to make you sick? And so you want to make sure you're not drinking water that's contaminated with E. coli. Now, what people with private wells typically will do is, if there's not an issue, they don't need to necessarily do anything. They test it and it's clean, there's no bacteria, that's good. But if there is bacteria in there, it tests positive, something that you can do as sort of a stopgap or as an immediate thing is, my door's closed so my dog won't bark. Well, she will bark, but she won't come in. But anyway, what they'll do is shock the well with chlorine. So it's like a large quantity of chlorine, kind of like if you have a pool, you put a bunch of chlorine in it to kill whatever's there. And then you let that chlorine dissipate, and then you have a filter to filter it out before you drink it. And you should be good. They'll test it after you shock it, and it should take care of the bacteria. However, I always want to err on the side of caution. And when we've had people who have come to us in support and said, mine tested positive for E. coli, what can you do? Well, what we recommend for people who own a well is to use some kind of a continuous disinfection system. And there are many different types. You can do just a, simple autochlorinator, or there's ozone, there's iodine. And the one that I personally like best, because you're not adding anything to the water, is UV. And UV will just kill the microorganisms and then your water is, there's no live organisms in it, and you don't have to filter out any other chemicals. So there's information on continuous disinfection of private wells, and you can look that information up, and there's all kinds of ways you can do it, and they're not all very expensive either. I mean, you could just use just chlorine, and that's probably the simplest and most common.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that biologicals are particularly dangerous for vulnerable populations. So young children and then older individuals definitely want to make sure that they're taking care of biological contaminants in their well water.
Yeah, because infections can be much, much more serious when you're in the vulnerable health population.
Yeah. And yeah, this is a very timely topic because we actually posted a nice infographic yesterday about chlorine and chloramine. So I would definitely suggest checking that out. So yeah, next we'll move into lead, which I think a lot of people wouldn't really think of when initially thinking about well water. But groundwater, especially in like the East Coast and like northeast part of the United States, groundwater can be extremely corrosive. And USGS has this wonderful map that I would definitely recommend checking out. And it just kind of shows different areas of the country and how corrosive the groundwater is in these different areas. And so corrosive water creates lead pipes to leach. And we saw this in Flint, Michigan, and Washington, D.C. We see it everywhere around the country, actually. And it's even true with our groundwater. So if you're living in a home that was built before lead pipes and plumbing were kind of phased out in the U.S., and that's 1986. So if you live in a home with a private well that was built before that date, there's a very high likelihood that you have lead pipes or fixtures or some sort of plumbing, unless it's been mitigated in your home. So lead is, it's still an issue in people who live on private wells. And I think you'd be surprised how many Hydroviv customers that we have that live on private wells who send their data to us, and lead is like the biggest concern.
Yep.
It's more problematic than arsenic. So I think it's just something that well owners need to be aware of. Yeah. Anything else to add to that, Christina?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. Yeah, because it was just, what really surprised me is that it was as recent as 1986. Because, until the home that I'm in now, which is new, before that, I mean, all of the houses I've lived in were built before 1986. Yeah. And made me go back and think, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of scary.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess we can I don't know if you wanted to say anything about nitrates. It's something that we don't really talk about too much at Hydroviv, just because concentrations aren't really problematic at this point. And yeah, there's not really too much to add, unless Christina, you have something else.
So nitrates, people worry about nitrates if they are in areas that are highly agricultural with lots of fertilizer and that runoff. And as a well, you're not going to necessarily get the surface water runoff, but some of the nitrates could get into the groundwater, and I certainly would understand why people would be concerned. Health-wise, the issues with nitrates are a little more specific, but if people are worried, we definitely advise people to talk to their healthcare provider. Get the nitrate levels tested if you're worried, and then talk to your healthcare provider and see if that's something that does need to be mitigated. So that's really, in infants, it can be very problematic. And that's, if you are a parent of an infant and you're concerned, absolutely talk to the pediatrician. And yeah, we'll just leave that one there, because that's really one where you want to just talk to your doctor and follow their advice.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Okay, so finally, as promised, we're talking about arsenic. So this is just one of those contaminants that is really all over the US, but there are some hot spots. So there's the arsenic belt in New England, and then parts of the southwestern area in the United States. So Arizona, New Mexico, California are all areas where arsenic is extremely problematic, and it has everything to do with the bedrock. So, you know, under the water table, the type of rock is just, it contains arsenic. And so it's not one of those contaminants where, like PFAS, it's not coming from, you know, like a manufacturing facility. It's just naturally occurring. It's going to be there. It's going to be an issue. There's really no way to mitigate it at the source. You can remove it from water, but we'll get into that. And so because arsenic is naturally occurring, the concentrations can change over time. So one of my favorite examples was, I think this was a couple years ago, we had a customer who wrote in saying, hey, I think I'm good with arsenic, but like I don't really know. I got my well tested for the most recent time I got my well tested was like 1991 or something like that. So, you know, this individual, decades had passed since the last time that they had their well tested for arsenic. And so what do you know? They came back with new test results. Arsenic had become a problem in that time frame. And so that can also do with the technology that's being used to test for arsenic. There are a lot of reasons why, you know, the concentration now could have been problematic. But I think the biggest takeaway for private well users that I would like for them to get from this is that one-time test that you get when you buy your house is on a private well isn't necessarily going to give you a full scope of information that you need to make a decision about your drinking water. So, you know, this test, it's mandated by realtors typically, and sometimes like a city will have requirements, whatever it is. It's just not going to give you everything you need to know.
Absolutely. And also regulatory does not equal toxicity or safety. So when I'm talking to people and we look at, you know, whether it's their well water report or whether it's their water quality report from the municipality, and I'll say, yeah, you have X amount of arsenic in your water. And they said, well, that's not over the limit, is it? I said, no, but be honest, do you really want to be drinking water with arsenic in it?
Yeah.
You know I don't. So yeah. I would prefer to just get rid of it, even at low levels. I don't want to be drinking low quantities of arsenic.
Yeah, especially
over a long period of time. That can't be good for you. There's so many health issues associated with arsenic. So yeah. Yeah,
and being from Maine, we're like peak arsenic belt area, and we have some of the highest rates of bladder cancer in the country. And bladder cancer we know it's associated with arsenic exposure, especially like prolonged arsenic exposure. So it's a nasty contaminant. And, you know, one last thing I will say is that it was recently detected in bottled water. So even though, even though this is a whole different separate Instagram Live, but a lot of bottled water companies pride themselves on being, you know, safer than tap water. This one company had something like 10 parts per billion, which is like the regulatory threshold.
Right at the edge.
Yeah, but it is way, way higher than anybody should be consuming.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, we're getting kind of tight on time here. So just a couple more things. Private wells don't have to meet any federal regulatory requirements. If you're a well owner, you're completely on your own. So you are responsible for ensuring that it is safe. You're responsible for, you know, getting it tested, getting it checked, making sure structurally that it's, you know, up to code, whatever it is. So you're really on your own for private wells, which can be a scary thing, but we have resources on our website, on our blog, and we have Christina who answers these types of questions all day long. And so definitely if you're a private well user, we would really encourage you to reach out to our team for any questions to make it a little bit less like you're on your own. So yeah.
Yeah. You're not alone. We're here to help you out, and we're water nerds. We love talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And we love to help you out. Even if it's not our filters that are the right solution for you, we'll help you, go into the right direction for what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thanks for joining. I hope everyone found this useful. Again, you can DM us on Instagram, email us at hello@hydroviv.com. And then you can also use our live chat on our website, hydroviv.com, and you will likely be speaking directly with Christina. So feel free, reach out, and we'll see everyone next week. So thank you, Christina, for joining, and see you later.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching, everyone.